So let me give you the types of mothers and fathers that people with complex trauma find that they have. So there's the lost father, the lost mother. And so that's just the parent who is absent. They abandoned you, neglected you totally. They maybe met your physical needs, but not your emotional needs. They were kind of there in one sense. They were a physical body in a room, but they were not there emotionally unavailable. So most of you can relate to that one. But then there's the abusive father or mother, and so they've abused you verbally, emotionally, psychologically, sexually, physically. Some of you went through that. Then there's the pampering father or mother, and so they didn't set boundaries for you. They spoiled you, treated you like a princess, let you away with stuff, just gave gift after gift, no rules, indulged you. Some of you had that. Then there's the toxic father or mother, and that's the one who's just controlling, domineering. They want to be enmeshed with you and involved in everything you do to control it. And then if anything goes wrong, it's always your fault. It gets twisted, so they're very narcissistic. And then there's the ruined father or mother, and that's the one, the parent who they depend on the child to meet their needs. They're in such a mess themselves that they're not taking responsibility for it. They're not trying to change. They just want the child to take care of them and fix their needs. So the child becomes the parent, and the parent becomes the child. And then there's the anguish creating father or mother. And that's the one who is always letting the child down. They make promises they don't keep. They keep getting the child's hopes up, but then they let them down because they don't follow through. And so the child is constantly getting their hopes up and then going through the anguish of dashed hopes and being let down. So what I want you to see is every one of those parent types has a narcissistic element. The parent isn't owning their stuff. The parent is acting like the victim. The parent is controlling, blaming, only concerned about their own needs, not meeting the child's needs, not nurturing the child, not getting the child, but expecting the child to get them. So what are the consequences? And so we said all 87 characteristics basically come out of this, but let me just highlight the main ones. So shame. The child who has that type of parent basically thinks it's their fault, and then they develop a core identity that says, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, something's wrong with me, I'm a failure, and they develop this negative core identity. They also usually carry a ton of false guilt, believing it is their fault that things aren't working out with their parents, even though the child has done nothing wrong. Most end up with anxiety issues. They're walking on eggshells all the time, hoping that their needs get met, hoping they don't get hurt, and anxiety becomes part of their life. And then depression, because life sucks for them. Life is hard for them. And so depression becomes a part of it. Then they have boundary issues. They don't know how to set healthy boundaries. They don't know what healthy boundaries are. And so they let people use them, abuse them, walk all over them, or they're too rigid in their boundaries. They just isolate. So all kinds of boundary things come out of that. Then many have to shut down their emotions, or they just have trouble regulating their emotions. And so mommy-daddy issues often leads to this deep fear of abandonment. And that deep fear of abandonment leads to, if that gets triggered, there's emotional dysregulation happening. And so there's some real emotional regulation issues. Some become this very driven, they're got to be successful. They're still trying to get mom and dad's validation. And so they drive themselves to succeed in the areas where mom and dad might give them validation. And so many children that come out of complex trauma with mommy-daddy wounds have a deep longing for validation. They just long for love. They long for reassurance, but they're afraid to get too close to people. And so they're torn. They're hungry to somebody to notice them and validate them, but they're afraid if they get too close, they're going to get hurt. Many end up perfectionistic, people pleasing. They're always driven to earn the approval of others. They have a deep fear of failure. And then they have this relationship pattern that their picker tends to choose emotionally unavailable people because that was their normal. What I find for girls with daddy wounds is that they end up loving and hating men. For men with mummy wounds, they love and hate women. And so they have this kind of internal contradiction. They want love, they love men, but they hate men. And so that they have to get sorted out. And then there's this fear as they become parents themselves that they're going to repeat their parents' parenting style. And often they do without knowing it, or even though they don't want to, because it was what their role model was. That's what their toolkit is. That's what all their subconscious brain programs are set to how to respond to various situations. You go back to how mom and dad responded. The next thing that's just so common that comes out of mommy and daddy issues is codependency. So the child basically is in a relationship with mom and dad where they're being wounded, their needs aren't being met, all of those things are happening, mom and dad aren't owning it, mom and dad aren't changing, so the child feels, I have to change, I have to earn love, I have to make mom and dad happy if they're going to meet my needs, so I have to become very aware of their emotions, their mood, and I have to respond to them. So that if they're in a negative mood, I got to fix them so that they will take care of me. So they become, I need to please in order to get love. I have to earn love. But that leads to they're more attuned to the needs of others than to their own. They're pushing their own needs down, thinking their own needs are bad, and putting everybody's needs ahead of their own. And then they become... Part of this codependency is they're willing to accept the odd breadcrumb of love because that's the best they've been able to get growing up. And it felt so good to get that little breadcrumb, and it sure is better than nothing. And so they go into relationships where they tolerate neglect and abuse and all kinds of stuff. But if they get the odd breadcrumb, then, okay, I'll hang on to this because it's better than feeling abandoned and being alone. So what I want you to see is mommy-daddy issues tend to train you, give you a toolbox, give you a template that set you up so that all your adult relationships struggle, they tend to be unhealthy, and eventually to fail. It's got a profound effect on future relationships. There's a few other things. Most people with mommy-daddy issues have difficulty trusting others, especially in intimate relationships. And often they distrust the other person's intentions. Then they often have control issues that they need to have control in relationships. And then usually they have conflict with authority or authority issues because all of mom and dad were their two main authorities and they were deeply hurt by them and they don't trust them. Then they tend to over-explain themselves. This is to me an interesting characteristic. So they never, as a child, because mom and dad were absent or neglectful, they never felt seen or heard, that anybody got them. And so now they feel this need to over-explain. You need to get me. So if you're going to get me, I need to over-explain everything so that you get me. And so that becomes a tendency because they just long for somebody to finally get them. Some go in the direction of hyper independence. They learned early on that mom and dad wouldn't be there for them. So they just said, I don't need anybody then. I'm going to be totally self-sufficient, independent, and they carry that as a badge of honor. And then they subconsciously push people away because that might make me where I need somebody. And I can't do that because I'm proud of the fact that I don't need anybody. Many people who've had absent parents end up engaging in very risky behaviors or outright rebellious behaviors. There's just a deep anger that they may not even be aware of that is driving them. And that starts to come out in their teen years in engaging in risky behaviors and rebellion. Then some, when they get into adult life and into intimate relationships, really struggle with commitment. They hated that their parents weren't committed to them, but they fear becoming committed to somebody else. And they really struggle. And so some avoid commitment or some become super clingy. And then they tend to engage in self-sabotaging behaviors. So whenever they're doing well, they seem to sabotage what is good and healthy. It's like they don't deserve it. It's like that's not their normal. It feels uncomfortable. They need to go back to what feels normal. Or anything that starts to feel too intimate, they sabotage because that feels too dangerous for them. And then it's important to talk about when parents are absent. So you don't have a mom in your life, you don't have a dad in your life. Many struggle with gender identity or role confusion. So for men, many become confused about who am I? What makes a man? And sadly, in our culture today, we have a lot of toxic masculinity stuff that men are a certain way, and it's very actually unhealthy. But they don't get a father to role model for them what a healthy man looks like. And so they're quite confused about that. But then if they begin to struggle with their own sexuality and they might feel that they have some gay tendencies, or they don't know what to do heterosexually, don't really know kind of where they land on the whole sexual spectrum, they don't have anybody to help them navigate that. And they just get kind of some of the messages from the culture that can get very confusing for them. And then for women, it can be the same stuff, but they also can really, if they've had an absent father, they then struggle in relationships with male authority, with self-worth, especially. It's just a huge issue for them. Let me add, just kind of as an aside, this doesn't happen as often, but the absence of a mother. And this could be that mother died. This could be that mom and dad divorced and you went with dad. This could be that mom got into addiction and disappeared. And so you really didn't have a mother. Or it could be that you had a mother who was physically there but not emotionally there. She was there to give rules, to try to fit you into a certain mold, but she wasn't there to nurture you, to understand you, to meet your needs. It was all about her, very narcissistic. Some of the wounds that can come out of that for women especially is that a mother like that often is very preoccupied with looks, image, body, sexual performance. And so they can really shame their children, especially girls, body shame or sexual guilt stuff. So many women coming out of that really struggle in the area of their body and kind of sex. And then with a controlling type narcissistic mother, you weren't allowed to set boundaries. You weren't allowed to voice your opinion. And so you struggle now with all of that. Or you weren't allowed to display certain emotions. That was considered not ladylike. To be angry, to express too much enthusiasm. You had to be very stoic, controlled. And so you struggle now a lot with emotions. And then you might find you just really mistrust females. That you might have good relationships with men, but women, no, that's a cat fight waiting to happen. And so you don't feel safe with females. Some, you just start to feel disconnected from playfulness because women had to be constantly busy in the home, doing work, accomplishing stuff. They just couldn't sit around. They just couldn't relax. They couldn't have fun. That was very much criticized. Some become very disconnected from their own natural nurturing energy. They've got so much anger, they've got so much distrust, they've had to fit into this mold that they lose who they are. They disconnect from those very important things inside of them. So I don't know how that affects you. I think for some of you, you just described my life, and it's quite painful. Where do we go from here? How do we heal mommy and daddy wounds, which pretty well everybody has? Some are deeper than others. And so to me, it's realizing that there's degrees to the wound, but usually some of the deepest wounds that we have were inflicted by mom and dad. That's why they're so hard to deal with. Often if mom and dad are still in our life today, that complicates it even more. But these are our deepest wounds. And we may not go to them right away in our recovery, but eventually we're going to get to them. And what usually forces us to get to them is we begin to realize that these deep, deep wounds are the ones that are getting triggered in hundreds of different ways today in our adult intimate relationships with our children. And when we get triggered, we do a lot of damage. And so it's beginning to realize, wow, I need to deal with these. Now, it's possible to heal, but it doesn't happen overnight. That's so key for you to understand. Deep wounds take time to heal, to change all of the different responses to the intense triggers that come out of those wounds. So it begins, in my mind, with some self-awareness, beginning to understand how your mommy and daddy wounds are affecting you today. And what you're probably going to see is that it doesn't just affect you in one or two ways. It affects you in many ways. But begin to really understand that. Begin to understand your patterns, that when your mommy or daddy wound gets triggered, so not feeling seen, feeling disrespected, feeling abandoned, what's your pattern for how you respond to that today? What happens in your thinking? What happens in your behavior? What happens in your emotions? Begin to develop growing self-awareness. Then talk to somebody who is skilled in understanding this, somebody who can help you unpack it, somebody who can help you connect the dots, somebody can help you begin to heal this stuff. And again, we do a lot of this in our LIFT program with people. It's such an important part. An exercise that many have found helpful is talking to an empty chair. And so you put an empty chair in front of you and imagine that mom is in it or dad is in it. And basically the whole point is that you can finally give voice to stuff that you've stuffed down, not been allowed to say, secrets you've been forced to keep, stuff you've been afraid to say. You can finally now just get it out. Say to them what you wish you could say if there was no chance of judgment, no chance of people being hurt. It's for your own benefit to finally be able to see accurately, to validate, to give voice to that. What I would suggest is to do that, but then have a therapist help you then walk through it. Because that's going to basically open up this wound that's been there, bring it out into the open, and it's going to be quite raw, and you're going to need somebody to help you then know where to go from there. Usually where people go from there is a bunch of steps. There's often a grieving process. You realize you didn't have the parents you hoped you would have. There's a loss in that. And if they're not changing today, you're not going to have the parents that you hoped you would have. And there's a loss in that. And so you go through a grieving process, but then you come to the point where you accept, okay, that's the parents I had. These are the parents I have today. I accept that they're not going to change. I accept that I can't change them. I accept that they're never going to validate me. They're never going to be the parents that I've wanted and needed to meet my needs. What am I going to do about it? I can't keep blaming them. I can't stay angry. I need to accept that that's the way it is, grieve it, and then figure out how to meet my own needs. Figure out what to do from here to kind of have surrogate type parents in my life. And so the whole point that I want people to understand when they begin to see their daddy, mommy issues is, I want you to understand how your parents affected you, not so that you can blame them, but so that then you can work on yourself. So people tend to go to, I want to blame them and get angry at them. And there's a time where you have to let the anger come out. That's part of the grieving process. Then there's a tendency, I want to go fix them so that they'll become the parents I want them to be. And it's no, you got to accept they're probably not going to become the parents you want to be. So you end up with, okay, then what am I going to do? I need to work on me. Now, there's an element here of forgiveness in the acceptance. And in a lot of programs, you're going to get people who go to forgiveness, I think, too quickly. And it's like you need to forgive your parents. And they push you to try to forgive your parents. And what I want people to hear is forgiveness, in my mind, is not something you can force yourself into. That usually does damage. You need to go through the anger. You need to go through the sadness. As you work on yourself, as you begin to heal your wounds, what you typically find is forgiveness kind of just happens automatically. All of a sudden you wake up one day and go, oh, I'm past the anger around my parents. I just accept who they are and that they're never going to be what I needed them to be. Forgiveness kind of naturally happens as you do all of the other work. The next thing moving forward, especially if your parents are still in your life, is figuring out what boundaries you need to have with them today. And I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. But what often you're doing is we all would like our parents to be in the circle of trusted, safe, close friends. But when you realize they're never going to be that, then you begin to realize, actually, my parents are more like an acquaintance or a casual friend. Ooh, that's kind of painful. But it's the reality. They don't have the capacity to talk at deep levels. They're not willing to look at their stuff and grow and change. And so what we can talk about is very limited. What we can talk about has to stay quite superficial. So they're really in the acquaintance category. Then if that's the case, you then go, okay, I still need a close family. So I'm going to have to develop a surrogate family. I'm going to have to find a community where I have some healthy people that can act as mentors, confidants, encouragers, nurturers, where I can really belong, find my tribe. So let me go to what do we do with our parents today? And so to me, there's three options here. Number one is if your parents are willing to change, own their stuff, it is very possible that you might be able to have a healthy relationship with your parents better than you ever had as a child. But that will only happen if they're willing to own their stuff. It won't happen, and this is what many want, is if I just change more, if I just please them more, then maybe they'll want a close relationship with me. It never worked in the past. It won't work now. It's dependent on, are they willing to grow and change and become healthy people? So that happens for some people, but it's not super common. The second option is they're not willing to change, but they're not super toxic. So you can still have a relationship, but you have to accept this is only going to be an acquaintance. So I'm not going to be able to have deep conversations. I'm only going to be able to talk about superficial topics. We can have some fun together. We can do some stuff together. My visits aren't going to be as long or as frequent, but I still value them in my life. I still have some value from maintaining a more superficial relationship. So I'm going to set some boundaries and just accept that that's the best I'm going to get. And I'm going to grieve that I'm not going to have a deeper relationship, but I'm going to enjoy just this more casual relationship. And then the third option for some is my parents are unwilling to own their stuff, totally narcissistic, still doing damage to me, still trying to hurt me. They're toxic. I have to go no contact with them. I can't have them in my life right now because every time I allow them in, they hurt me badly. And so I just have to put up a severe boundary, and some have to do that. Now, what many find is they have to do that for several years while they grow and heal. And then they get to a point where they realize, okay, I can have a more superficial relationship with them now. And if they hurt me a little bit, I'm strong enough now, it's not going to bother me. I'm strong enough now that if they try to bait me into a trap, I'm not going to take the bait. All of those things can change, but some have to go for a period of time with a very severe boundary that I can't have my parents in my life. And that is a painful reality for some. Now, let me end by just saying something to parents. To me, as I look at all the parents that I have dealt with over the years, is we all fail as parents. Now, some of us, we had great intentions as parents, but we just were following bad advice. We were taught badly about what a good parent was. Others, we had to be away from our children because we only could find one job, and we had to be away on the road. And it wasn't we wanted to neglect or abandon our children. We just didn't have any options. We had to pay the bills. Then others, we were going through some difficult stuff at that time. We had a very sick child, or we had somebody who died, or we had a loss of a business. And we weren't trying to neglect our kids. It's just that life was so overwhelming that we just didn't have the time or energy to give the kids what they needed. And so others will say, you know what, I know I failed as a parent. It just tears me apart with guilt. I don't know what to do with it. Or others go, I was a great parent. And they're in total denial about how they hurt their children. They don't want to go there. They refuse to go there. And then others were a pretty good parent. So there's all kinds of options about the type of parenting that we end up in and the reasons we end up there, and then how we view it now. But what I want us to see is that we all can still grow as a parent. I find it interesting that children, even in their 40s, 50s, 60s, still typically want a relationship with their parents, and they want it to be a good relationship. It's still possible to have that, but we have to keep growing regardless of our age. So let me say this again. There are no perfect parents. What the term that has developed is good enough parents. What does a child want in a parent? The child wants a parent who is present and wants to connect with them regularly. They want a parent who's humble, a parent who's willing to learn, a parent who's willing to admit their mistakes, a parent who's always growing and wanting to change. They want a parent who hears the child, sees the child, values the child just as much as they want the child to value and hear them. So it's not a double standard, it's a mutual. And they want a parent who, when there's damage, works hard to repair it and is willing to own their stuff. Let me say this as well. All of us as parents have regrets. Nobody's a perfect parent. We live with guilt. We live with regrets. We can't go back and redo some of this stuff. So we have to forgive ourselves, accept that, but be willing to keep changing today. I can't go back and redo it, but man, I can make sure I don't recommit that today. I'm going to keep working on myself. And if our kids see us continuing to grow and change, it affects them. They now feel we're safer than they used to be. They now feel, wow, maybe I want to reconnect with them. So again, let me end with this. Bottom line, being a good parent is not about just doing techniques. Being a good parent is getting healthy in every area of my life, going through the process of continuing to grow, owning my stuff. That's the greatest gift we can give to our children, is to do that. So I hope this is very helpful for you. For the children with mommy daddy wounds and issues, for the parents who live with the guilt and struggle with facing some of the damage that they've done, we all can heal and grow. And I hope this will help you do that. Hi again. If you found any of this video to be helpful, it would mean so much if you would like, subscribe, make a comment, and if you know somebody else that would benefit from this video, that you would share it with them. That just tells the YouTube algorithms that people are finding this to be helpful material, and then they'll suggest it to others, and it will help even more people. One other thing, we have several different YouTube memberships available to people. And what I want you to understand about that is, if you're able to, what that does is it enables us, or allows us to provide scholarships to people to take our online lift program, so that people that couldn't afford to get the healing they need for their trauma are given an opportunity to do that. So if you're able and that would be of interest to you, it's one way that you can help others. So thank you again for being part of what we're doing. Just wish you the best on your healing journey.